I make my living as a climbing coach, and the board I recommend more than any other is the Tension Board 2. As an early adopter of systemized spray walls, it's what I always imagined boards had the potential to be. You can learn more about the TB2 at their in-depth article on what it is, how it came to be, and how to use it the way they intended, with progression toward mastery in mind. The link is in the show notes. Season 2 of Written in Stone is generously supported by RAB, one of climbing's most historic brands. Founded in 1981 by climbers for climbers, RAB are on a journey to reduce the impact of their business, expand access to the outdoors, and preserve our mountain playgrounds for future generations. RAB, the mountains are our meeting place. Rob LeBreton wears a lot of hats. First, he's a longtime friend of the show, but he's also a dad, husband, gym owner, former president of Sport Climbing Australia, an absolute climbing legend. The first Australian to establish climbs of 31 and 32, that's 13D and 14A, in Australia. And after the Snowbird episode came out, Rob sent me a video of the finals that he'd recorded onto VHS back in 1988, which resulted in several things. First, I got really excited to see the famous Edlinger moment at the top of the wall, and it did not disappoint. Second, I posted it on YouTube and have been blown away by how many people are excited to see it. The link is in the show notes. And third, it made me realize how much someone across the world can be impacted by a story and the media created around that story. So I asked Rob to come onto the show, partly so that I could better understand where Australian climbing was in 1988, post Punks in the Gym and as competitions were starting to ramp up, and partly because I wanted to see what this television broadcast meant to him. Let's get into it. First off, I just wanted to say a massive thank you for sending that video over. It was like, I felt like the first time ever watching climbing or something when I got to see the Edlinger moment at the end. It's such a, I've read so much about it that I just couldn't wait to see it, and I was so happy to. So thank you. And the internet is loving it. Like, the people on YouTube are like, "Wow, I can't believe I get to watch this."
That's so cool. It's so iconic, isn't it? It's become such a legendary moment in climbing that it is really cool.
When you recorded it in 1988, were there artificial climbing surfaces in Australia?
No, not at all. Like there'd never been any comps here. Certainly no gyms back then. It was just this thing that came on TV, and I was lucky enough that obviously I wasn't there. It was on a Saturday on Whitewater Sports, so it would have been, I can't remember exactly, but it would have been like a phone call to my family, and someone's like, "Oh, there's climbing on TV! Quick, record it for Rob!" And someone would have put a video cassette in, and off they went with it.
I love that. I love that.
Yeah, which is why we don't have much of the females. Yeah, the females was the next weekend, I think, from memory, and that we didn't get much of that on there. It was just when someone's recorded that one halfway through, I think it comes up.
Mm. When you're watching this thing on an artificial surface, I'm going to stick on this for a minute because it's climbing on an artificial surface. So it's not climbing as you know it, like personally. Did it seem strange? Did it seem like exciting and futuristic? What did it seem like at the time?
Yeah, I think it definitely felt like it was the future. It was where climbing was heading in one part of climbing was heading anyway. And certainly we heard about competitions
Right.
coming through in Mountain Magazine and Climbing and Rock and Ice. We'd heard that competitions were a thing, but to actually see one and just how how it was packaged, and it was so over the top, kind of sensationalized for us as climbers, but it was just a fairly typical sports broadcast, really.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's I talked with the filmmaker, and he comes from NFL films. Like he made football documentaries.
Right.
And US football documentaries. And he thought, like, I have to package this the same way that I do these mainstream sports to sell it to the mainstream, and if we look at climbing video now, especially of comps, and compare it, it's a whole different world. Now we have the static shots from a couple of different angles and cameras switching, but we don't get a lot of that same drama. So part of me wishes the drama was still there.
Yeah, absolutely. And just the number of quotes in that video, like I can pretty well tell you the whole thing verbatim. I've watched it so many times. And like, because after that, I lived in a house full of climbers, and we would just be constantly spraying each other with quotes from the video, and just bring them out all the time in any situations. Like, look what he's holding on to. There's nothing there. You should have grabbed the hold and fired right through. All that stuff would come out all the time. So it's so funny now even to watch and see just how it's presented
Yeah.
and just the but it was exciting at the time. It was so exciting to see climbing presented in this mainstream way, and it came on to mainstream television in Australia, so it obviously worked because it had worldwide reach with it.
Yeah, I love seeing, especially because I got to watch the video right after I had been climbing with Jibe Tribu. Like I went out and met him in Tin Sleep and climbed with him. And then I come back to this video and I'm like, I click through the video when I'm watching it. And the first place I click on is Tribu with, Jim Brown, the commentator, sitting next to him. And Tribu looks as French as possible, with his scarf
The
on.
scarf
And,
on his neck.
you know, yeah.
So
I
classic.
was just like, "Oh man, this is amazing!" Like he knew the moment, and he was ready for it.
Absolutely. And and they've got him commentating on the American hero Ron Calc going up,
Yeah,
and then Ron slips, and Jibe's like got this like little bit of delight in his voice as well as like, oh, it's easy for
he
him.
does. Yeah, he's like, "That's a mistake. That's a mistake." So I love it, man. Well, it brought me back. Like hearing the way you described it when you messaged me, it brought me back to when I was a young skateboarder, and we would tape on VHS the skateboard competitions in California, and I remember watching this competition in Anaheim, California with it was like a Tony Hawk Christian Hosoi face off, and I bet I watched that VHS tape 5,000 times, and I was not a competition skater really, so it was a slightly different world, a little removed from my version of skating, but it was so cool to see the star power in the video and to like get to watch them all skate. And I have to imagine it was a similar thing with this Snowbird competition.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I mean, we kind of take it for granted now that we can go onto Instagram and watch Adam Ondra or Alex Megos or anyone climbing. But back then, you didn't get to see anyone climbing except for people at your local crags. You saw a few stills in the magazines that were 3 months old by the time they got here to Australia. But to actually go and see them climbing and see that the way that they just they approach moves, and Michael Menestral had this fantastic little like sort of self-encouragement shout he was doing up the wall,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
that was just unbelievably cool. I was just like, yeah, brought out a few like, "Ah!" when I was like climbing after that, watching Mark. So yeah, I don't think you can quite comprehend these days like just how isolated we were from what was going on in the world. No matter where I mean, obviously in Australia we were, but anywhere in the world, unless someone happened to be at your crag, you never got to see anyone climb apart from the people immediately around you.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. Like in Australia, did it seem like you were more isolated? I mean, obviously, geographically, you are to some degree, but there was Arapiles, and it was this like, it seemed like a world destination in the 80s.
Yeah, it was. I think around that time, kind of the late '80s, Arapiles had started to go into a lull. There was a massive amount of action around the mid '80s when Kim was really active there, and it had like a really international focus. The festivals were there, the international climbing festivals, the Wolfgang and Stefan coming out, obviously. But during the late 80s, climbing in Australia was sort of a bit more in a bit of a lull, and there wasn't a lot happening. So it was really rare to see, um, you know, anyone from anywhere else at the crags. And I spent a bit of time down the Raps and in the Blue Mountains
Mm,
where I live, but we were really kind of off the circuit at that stage. I think it was because climbing was taking off in the south of France, and that became the destinations to go to. I think Australia was missing out a little bit at that stage. So yeah, so it did feel like we were particularly isolated. And to find out news, you'd have to wait for a magazine that was 3 months old by the time it hit the shelves here, and even then they were super expensive by the time they were
right.
shipped out. So you'd have to go into the shops to read it because couldn't afford $20 for a magazine at
Yeah.
$50 now. So you'd go in the shop and you'd read it. And, yeah, I had a mate that worked at one of the climbing stores who used to like give me the shop copies. They all had shop copy on them. They're all the ones that I had.
Yep.
So yeah, it was how we got our news. So yeah, I got a shop copy, and there was this article by Dale Goddard and Christian Griffith about climbing in France. And it was just like that was my most read article. I
Yep.
loved it, and that was what really cemented my idea that I've got to go to Buttes and I've got to see these routes. And we got the same photo that Christian and Dale got in the in Apt under in the sort of the little town square. Yeah, so that was how we got our news back then.
Yeah, there was a thing I wanted to do early in the season, and it never fully panned out because it was just way too much work. Where I wanted to ask everybody I interviewed what piece of climbing media from back then were they most influenced by, and then go try to find that piece of media, the photo or the ad or the video or whatever. And very quickly, I ran up against the fact that I just can't find a lot of it anymore. Um, but I think we all were influenced by some piece of media, whether it was video or photo or whatever, and some part of our climbing lives sort of directed us to that place or to that route to try to get that photo, whatever it was, because of this thing we saw early in our climbing careers.
Yeah, absolutely. There'd be, and I know that happens these days. The kids still put like tear the photos out of the magazine and put them on the walls and all that sort of thing. It's so everything's
Yeah,
so
I
digital
wonder.
now. Yeah, but yeah, my wall was plastered with ripped up copies of Rock magazine and climbing and mountain, and they were all over the wall. And I just obviously as you do as a teenager, you just look at them and you want to go there and you want to do that.
Yeah, well, you just said as a teenager, but then as an adult, you went to Snowbird. So tell me
Yeah.
about that.
Well, we were in Utah a couple few years ago. My wife and son and I, and we were climbing at Maple primarily, and we came up to Salt Lake for the day, and we're like, oh, we've got to go check out Snowbird. And it was kind of a double win because there was a massive dump of snow when we got there, and my son had never seen snow before, so we got to play in the snow and had the best time playing. But the primary reason we went to Snowbird was to see the well, not to see the wall, but to see the side of the building where the wall was. And we got photos in front of it, and got to
Yeah.
sort of see where it's so different now. There's like a walkway in between, and you can't imagine people sitting on the grass watching a climbing comp there. That you could sort of see if you looked really closely at the wall. At least we imagined we could see where maybe the wall was fixed, and we got to go there, got to get our photo with it, and got to sort of be in the spot. It was pretty cool.
Man, I love that so much. The I think a lot of the people who make this media don't realize its impact, and there are people all over the place like you who are like, "Oh my gosh, I remember seeing this on television when it first aired," and who've been quoting it on another side of the world from you ever since.
Yeah,
That's a totally real thing.
we got a Snowbird sticker on the back of our van now, so means nothing to anyone except us.
That's perfect. I wanna talk to you a little about Australian sport climbing and like the shift into sport climbing in the 80s. I've talked a lot about that shift as it happened in the US and France and England. And Australia has been the other big part of this season, especially with Punks in the Gym going up. And I had a great short conversation with Louise Shepherd, but I haven't really talked to anyone about whether there were the like bolting wars or the ethical debates and all of that was going on in the US. Was that happening in Australia?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Australian climbing culture has always been influenced by what's happening in US and the UK primarily. So we had the same sort of coming of age kind of problems that happened around the world, where people were working out, was sport climbing a threat to what was happening in the traditional sense, and where it was going to take the sport. And the same with competitions and gyms and everything was all part of that discussion as well. So there was a lot of resistance in Australia to having fully bolted routes. We had like a really, particularly in the Blue Mountains, a really traditional way of bolting routes where they were bashing carrot bolts, the infamous, ones where you put your own hangers on,
Mhm.
and they have very little sort of pull-out strength. So they're quite they're not the safest thing. And so there was definitely a push against moving on to other types of bolting, both for its sort of visual sort of aesthetic on the crag, but also for where it moved climbing. But I was sort of part of a group that was really like, no, if we're going to bolt things, we need to put in bolts that are safe, and that are the routes that are set up for climbing and for sport climbing, so that we could push ourselves physically and not just mentally.
Yeah, and I assume that sort of shift that was happening for you, for Australia, coincided a little with the lull that you talk about in Australian climbing, is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it was really during that time. It was when sport climbing took off. It was particularly at Nowra, where we made a really conscious decision that all the bolts were either going to be fixed hangers or ring bolts glued in, and that roofs would have lower offs at the top rather than topping out. No natural gear, except on the obvious crack lines. And we made a really conscious decision for that, and that really did reinvigorate the sport here and get people really excited about climbing, and really open it up too, I think, to a much broader range of people as well. It sort of expanded who climbing appealed to, having a really well set up sport crag.
Mhm.
Yeah, and of course you had all the classic stories of people coming down and getting upset that things were bolted as they were, and all that sort of thing went on. There was no sort of, I don't really think that there was many of the Yosemite style fistfights about bolts and that sort of thing that you
Right.
hear, all the legends of the Stone Masters. But there was definitely a little bit of crankiness behind the scenes, and a little bit of people being angry with what people had done and lashing out in the media and whatever. But like everywhere else, everything settled down and people appreciate. I think in the end, the people that are sport climbing appreciate what the trade climbers are doing as much as the trade climbers appreciate what the sport climbers are doing now, as much as we can coexist together.
Absolutely. Yeah. I just had a conversation earlier today with Steve Bechtel, and we were talking about how now, if we look back at it, it's very clear that sport climbing doesn't happen if there's not a group of traditional climbers who are pushing themselves really hard and looking to climb harder things and venturing out onto these unprotectable faces. And it all just builds on the next thing. It seems like initially, like you just said, I think the word you used was perceived it as a threat to what was going on. And I think that's a really perfect way to say it, that when things are starting to change, the person in the traditional role is going to feel like that change is a bit of a threat. But over time, it seems to just show that this whole thing just builds on the last layer that was there. And we owe a lot to the people right behind us. And we owe it to the next generation to hand it off to them in a good state as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I remember the first time I was in Bukes, and there was Remy Escoffier, is a really well-known French alpinist in the 80s, and he was doing 8As, and we're like, wow, this guy's like really, really badass. trad climber, doing some really amazing stuff. And here he is, sport climbing 8A, which was hard at the time.
Yeah, that's fascinating actually to hear because we want to put people in these little boxes like, oh, he's an alpinist, he can't sport climb, he's a crack climber, he's not a good boulderer. We want to put them in those boxes, but even back then those boxes didn't necessarily always exist.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And because I'd grown up when climbing was climbing, and there was no difference between sport and trad or anything like that. It was just climbing. Most of the people that I grew up with and were friends with were on the traditional side, but we were still friends. It was sort of people who were in the middle that couldn't decide which way to go. That sort of more had an issue with it. It was the
Yeah.
people who were comfortable with what they were doing on one side or the other um, that were quite happy to you know let the others do their thing and be happy to support them in what they're doing as well.
Yeah, that's a really important part of all of this, I obviously Alan Watts has become friend of the show and his role in this thing, if I hadn't ever talked to Alan, I would view him as this like rabble rouser who was pushing against the system and, you know, but in reality, he was just doing his own thing. He felt really comfortable about what he was doing. He was committed to what he was doing, and that ended up having a giant ripple effect across America and elsewhere, that he was doing what he was doing just comfortably.
Yeah, and I think people like him and Jim Carrigan were so good at trad climbing before they moved into more sport type climbing that
Yeah.
they were the ones who were really the pioneers in a lot of sense, weren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. So, we moved through the late 80s in Australia. The sport climbing is really catching hold. I believe, I don't know if I have my facts exactly right. You did the first 31 and 32 done by an Australian. Is that right?
Yeah, first in Australia, Jeff Wigan did White Wedding in Smith. He repeated that, but the
Got
two
it.
routes that I did were the first ones that had been established here by an Australian.
Great. And that was sexy is the word
Hmm.
and something attack.
Attack mode.
Attack mode. Yeah.
Both at Nara.
Well, and attack mode I find really interesting because, I think there are several links there. Uh, Wolfgang establishes the first 14A in the world
Mm.
in Arapiles in Australia. Then you establish the first 14A 32 uh, in Australia by an Australian. Then, am I correct that you had an extension already bolted to that?
Yeah, yep. And that got done by Taylor Webb Parsons exactly 11 years to the day
Right.
after I did Attack Mode.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it was to the day. Yeah.
Wow, that's cool. Um, and then Ben Cossey bolted another extension that Jake Bresnahan did. Is that correct?
Yep, that's correct. But it can't go any further now. It's going to end up in the car park.
It can't go. It's as high as it could go. No more extensions. I think that's a really cool piece of the way that history works. There was this paradigm set by one of the all-time greats of climbing, Wolfgang. Then you following in those footsteps, being motivated by what he did, are the first Australian to establish that grade in Australia. And then it gets, the extension that you bolted gets done by another generation of Australian superstar. Then another extension gets bolted by another generation, and then another climber. Maybe Jake and Ben are same generation, or maybe Jake is a little behind Ben. I'm not exactly sure how that works, but
Yeah, about the
then
same.
it finally gets done. And I think that's just a cool way that history works in climbing.
Yeah, yeah. It is. It's good. Yeah, we're always building on what those before us have done, and you sort of always. I think it's up to the next generation to kind of look at what's been done and be like, "Is that the best you got? Come on." could have done better and be really pushing it. I think
Yeah.
each generation needs to have a little bit of respect, but also a bit of healthy disregard for what the previous generation's done, so they can build on what's gone before them.
Yeah, I agree completely. And I like that you added in the next generation should be saying, is that all you've got? Like, we're crushing all the things that you guys climbed. Like, what else is, this is easy. That's how it should be. That's what I want to hear from the next generation. I'm not going to get bent out of shape when some 16-year-old kid climbs way harder than me. You should be climbing way harder than me, you
Yeah,
know?
exactly, exactly. You've got to. I think I know when I was young, I was sort of doing the routes that had gone before me in the Blue Mountains and gone, well, that's not hard, you guys trying here or what, and hopefully that's how our sport develops is by people, it's just going that bit further and really you build on what's come before you, don't you? I mean, you're not going to climb
Yeah.
the next hardest thing if you haven't got the previous hardest thing to learn on.
Yeah. Absolutely. What do you think of the upcoming generations? Not in terms of like, are they doing it right or wrong, but more of, are we giving them enough history to understand what the past generations have done and how the future builds on it? And I'm asking you because I know you've had a role in Sport Climbing Australia and with the Olympics and all of that. So you've had some experience with this current generation of crushers.
Yeah, I think it is a shame if the climbers coming through don't kind of understand and don't get to learn the opportunity to learn about history. And generally, it's not from not wanting to. It's just that sort of thing. I mean, I guess as you find from all having to research what you've done, it is pretty hard to dig up because it's all recorded in magazines that have
Hmm.
been lost in different places, and we don't really have that sort of rich sort of history going back that a bigger sport might have, where things have been recorded and documented for years and years and years. So I think what you're doing is really important because it's really helping people like me who love it to go back and hear it again. But it's also an opportunity for younger climbers coming through to really get a chance to experience the history that's come before them and realize um, what has happened and really appreciate the just all the things that go on before them, which they may be seeing things that happen now and they think, oh, this has never happened before, but of course it has. Things keep going in cycles, and so the challenges that they face have been faced before and will be faced again.
Well, I also think I watch a lot of the climbing media that comes out, and I think Rumbler there in Australia does a really fantastic job of kind of blending the modern climbers and the modern climbing style with some history and making it all really cool and interesting to recognize. So I appreciate that there are things like that out there. And also, my podcast is because I'm trying to look at climbing as a whole, so across the whole world. If I were just doing US climbing history, this would be way easier to do, but so I have to lean on podcasts like Baffle Days or like Jam Crack, who are interviewing people from the history of these other places that I may not have heard about prior. So I appreciate what even the podcasters who are doing the thing in their own local areas, how they're informing what I'm doing. So I think climbing, the media of climbing, all of this, we all just are building on each other.
Yeah, absolutely. And if it's not recorded, eventually it is going to get lost because people's memories go and as they pass on from the sport or whatever. So yeah, I think it's really good. It's good to see it documented. It's good to see it recorded and good to see it shared.
Rob, I want to know, how is your climbing these days?
Uh, well, it's pretty ordinary actually. I still love going climbing. I still love getting out. I'm still trying to improve all the time. But I had some really sort of bad sort of forearm issues for quite a few years. So I'm sort of just trying to build back up again from that. But I still love it. I still love getting to the crag. It's a big part of what we do as a family. So I'll still keep going, still keep trying, still keep enjoying it. And yeah, I think just being able to just train each day, do something each day is just a big part of keeping um, in touch with climbing, but it's also a big part of just keeping your brain as well as your body healthy.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with that more. It's such an important part of, I think it goes from in our youth, we're far more interested in performance. And then there comes this phase of our lives where we're like trying to eke out some really hard things. And then it becomes more of a health thing. Like going climbing is so important to my mental health, my physical health, that I just can't ignore that piece of it. And as a result, the performance, even though I still want to push myself and love pushing myself, the actual numbers that I'm performing at don't matter nearly as much as I just need to get out there and do it.
Yeah, absolutely. We try to get down to Nowra over the as many weekends as we can over winter, and it's always Friday afternoon. You get home from I'm a school teacher teaching elementary school, and so I get home and I'm usually really mentally fried from the week, and we sort of just begrudgingly pack the van and get in there and just almost have to do it on autopilot. But
Hmm.
just by the time you're halfway down there, you just feel everything lifting off you, and you feel the weight coming off, and just frees your brain for the weekend, and you have a great time. You come back feeling like you've had a week away rather than a couple of days away. So climbing's such a special thing. It's been such a gift throughout my life, and it just keeps giving in different ways to what I expected.
Yeah. And your wife, Carly, is also climbing legend. And I know she had a few really good sins a couple of years ago. So just out of curiosity to know what the legends are doing these days, how's her climbing going?
Oh, she's a crusher. She's a total crusher. She's still climbing, obviously, lots and doing everything. Her big focus is route setting and paraclimbing route setting. So she's setting at the
Yeah.
World Champs later this year. And yeah, so she's still standing hard, still climbing hard, and still a real inspiration to me, but also I think particularly to the women in Australian climbing.
Yeah. I think that's definitely true. Especially in the last bunch of years, I've seen her name popping up again more and more. And that gets me excited. I think it's very cool the way that we can shift gears, find new things in climbing, whether it's, the resurgence of a thing that we used to be really into, or it's a totally new thing, but it's still in this culture and in this community. And that's so important for the young climbers to see, even if they don't know it's important to them yet.
Yeah, I think particularly there's the young women climbers in Australia. There's such an admiration and respect for Carly for everything she does. So it's really good to see her being a real role model. She's got kids, she's got a business, she's got international route setting, and she's still out getting amongst it out there at the crags. So it's so cool.
Well, Rob, thank you for this. Like I said before, you made my week, made my year maybe with the Snowbird video. I had called so many people trying to get that video and I just needed to see that moment, and the video was better than I could hope for, and the story that came along with it, I think, is really special. That this thing that all these years later I'm researching and trying to, report on, so to speak, meant so much to people years ago. And it was actually really fun for me to get to watch the competition while listening for the crowd and how they're reacting, because I was trying to recreate that in my own telling of the story. Um, so it was really fun to hear the real thing. So thank you for that. Thank you for all the things you do for Australian climbing. You're an absolute legend, and I appreciate you doing this.
Excellent. Thanks, Chris. Thank you for all you're doing because, I know that I've certainly recommended your podcast to lots of people and I've really enjoyed every episode that's come out. So keep up the good work. It's so good to hear these stories being shared.
One, two.
Written in Stone is produced by me, Chris Hampton, with help from Riley Rush for Plugtone Audio, a group of the best, most impactful podcasts in the outdoor industry. Go watch the Snowbird finals on YouTube. It's incredible. And remember, this show is 100% rooted in the facts, but like Todd Skinner always said, never let the truth get in the way of a good story. If you love what you're hearing, give us those 5 stars and a glowing review, join our Patreon, the Secret Stoners Club, and tell everyone you know at the crag, at the gym, and those climbers still quoting some old random climbing video, definitely tell them. And together, we can tell the stories of climbing's most important ascents, one decade at a time. Secret Stoners. You know, I didn't mention this in the interview with Rob, but when I went to Australia a few years ago and traveled around the country doing workshops, the first place we did a workshop was in Rob and Carly's gym in Villawood in Sydney. And at that workshop, I told them, you know, where we were headed and what we were doing, and they loaned us 2 crash pads for 6 weeks. I'd never met them, both legends of Australian climbing, and they just loaned us crash pads to take with us. That's just, not all climbers are that way. Yeah, I think we need to stop saying that's just how climbers are, because not all climbers are like that. But Rob definitely is. Carly definitely is. And a lot of the people I met over there are, frankly. So, again, thanks to Rob. I appreciate you sending the video and sitting down and chatting. That was a lot of fun. And I still desperately want to get to Nowra. It just looks so fun. Okay. Shout out to our newest rock stars, Trevor Wade, Matthew Stasiak, or is it Stasiak? Probably Stasiak, I'm guessing. That also brings up the question, do you just say the name? When you don't know how to pronounce a name, do you say it with authority and then just move on? Or do you try to pronounce it several ways and make it very obvious that you don't know what you're saying? It's always a question, especially as an MC of things and on a podcast. Which way do you go? Always hard to say. You know which way I'm going this time, obviously. Sorry if I butchered your name, Matthew, but I appreciate you supporting. Favor from all of you. If you are on YouTube, please go to the Written in Stone YouTube channel and subscribe over there. The success of this Snowbird video has reignited an idea that I had in the past, which is some of these episodes, when I'm collecting video resources, could have interesting little mini videos that accompany the episodes that just add context to these old, all this old footage that I find. And that would be really fun to put on there and would be a great resource for everybody who's really interested in this. But monetizing on YouTube requires a couple of different metrics. One of those is subscribers, which frankly is an outdated metric in the social media landscape today, but that's the game we're playing. So if you're on YouTube, go watch the Snowbird video if you haven't. And second, please subscribe over there. The faster we can get this thing monetized, the sooner I can start working on cool little videos. Also, if you hear the wind going crazy, that's because it seems like there is a hurricane outside. It's not. I'm in Wyoming, but that's what it seems like. We are plugging away on this book. I think that pre-orders will be up pretty soon, by the very end of this season, which is coming quickly. We have one more story Oh, there's the thunder. Apparently it is a hurricane. We have one more story to go and a couple of interviews. Before I try to collect all of my thoughts on this whole season and the directions that it has taken me, and what we can learn from it all, which is a lot. I expected this season to go a lot like the 1990s did, but it really has spun into a different direction and a whole new animal. And I like the way that it's gone. It's a little more documentary style, a little less pure storytelling. But I feel like the documentary style has been somewhat necessary to connect all of the dots, draw all the parallels, see how everything is working in concert. And the feedback has been great. So thanks to all of you who've been sending messages and who are showing support in various ways. I appreciate it. Next week, our final story episode of the season, our final regular season story. There are some stories coming after the season, but for now, we're going to be telling the story of, I hadn't even thought about how to frame this yet, of one of the most groundbreaking achievements in climbing history that has, for some reason, been dramatically overlooked and undervalued. We all know that it happened, but even the supposed historical media ignores it oftentimes, which is baffling to me. So that's next week. I'll see you then.